What's going on, guys? Welcome to something a little bit different. This is going to be a movie review, just a review or discussion of Godzilla minus one. With me, as always, of course, I have Blue Spade.
Yeah, of course. This movie takes place during, I think, near the end of World War II. Uh, so uh, yeah, I mean, a lot of talk about this particular movie. I mean, this. Well, just to clarify, this is not like a follow up or any prequel to like any of the other Godzilla movies like Shin Godzilla that came out back in 2016. This movie was of course directed by Takashi Yamazaki. I think he directed some other movies in Japan. I can't remember what it was. I think he directed the live action versions of Parasite. That I think back in how long ago was that? Like back in 2014. And
I didn't know that actually. I know apparently he had actually directed some war movies before.
Yeah, he
Uh,
also directed, what was it? Lupin the Third, which was like, what was it? The CG, animated film that came out?
oh, the first
Yeah, the
Lupin the
first.
third, the first.
Yeah, so he also directed that movie too. But overall, I really did like the directing style of this film. Also, I did enjoy the human aspect of this film more than I did with some of the other Godzilla films, particularly like the MonsterVerse films that are released in the U.S.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, yeah, because they did try to do that same thing with the human aspect, where they had things mainly from the human perspective, but I felt like it didn't work quite as well just because the characters weren't really as interesting. I feel like had the movie focused more so on Bryan Cranston's character instead of killed him off in the beginning of the movie, it probably would have been a much better movie just because his not just because it's Bryan Cranston, but just because I felt like his character was there was a lot more going for him as opposed to his son. But then the movie just, of course, it felt like a lot of people felt like it was false advertising because it mainly marketed itself as that Bryan Cranston was going to be the main character, and as we know, that wasn't the case. Um, but in this movie, however, they try to do that same thing where it's mainly from the human perspective, um, but the characters actually do get proper development and are, I would say, pretty well fleshed out. The main character has a pretty interesting character arc and struggle throughout the movie that it, I would say directly relates back to Godzilla, of course, because he's one of the first people that encounters Godzilla, and also because of his backstory, it being a kamikaze pilot.
Yeah, so the movie starts off pretty much in the last few days of World War II, particularly like the Pacific theater of that war. So the main character of the movie is named Koichi Shikishima, who is of course the kamikaze pilot. Um, he ends up flying over to like a remote island. I think it was Odo Island, where he lands his plane. Of course, the mechanics there, particularly, I think, what was it? The mechanic's name? I think his name is Osaku Tachibana, who notices that there weren't any like noticeable damage on the plane, and he suspects that Shikishima might have shirked on his duties, for you know, I think during one of the battles.
Yeah, um, yeah, and of course, like Shikishima does is sort of evasive about it. Like uh, he doesn't. I don't think he really reveals like that he was one of the kamikaze pilots to them. Um, but yeah, they like you said, they are suspicious of him because of the I think the state of his plane. Uh, but this kind of plays out similarly to because a lot of this movie is very heavily inspired by the original Godzilla from yeah, I think the 50s. Um, it kind of takes some plot points are similar to it, if not somewhat a little bit different. Like in the original movie, the I think Godzilla also first appears on this remote island, and the islanders know about Godzilla. It's kind of the same thing here, and I was kind of surprised at how quickly the Godzilla shows up in this movie. Usually, there's a little bit more of a build up before Godzilla actually shows up, but here they show him like I think like about 10 or so minutes into the movie, because he shows up at night and he just well the the people that are stationed there, they see Godzilla and they, of course they start freaking out. They're trying to hide from him, um, and they ask Shikishima to get on his mounted gun on the plane to try to distract Godzilla. Um, but of course, Shikishima kind of freezes up when he actually gets to the mounted gun, and he can't, he can't really do anything. Of course, Godzilla ends up finding the other men there and pretty brutally killing them.
Yeah,
But of course, Shikishima manages to be one of the few that actually survives the attack.
yeah, and of course, the following morning, the only two survivors of that attack is, of course, Shikishima and the mechanic Tachibana, which, of course, Tachibana, like, puts heavy blame on Shikishima for not, for not trying to shoot at Godzilla. Though we don't even know for sure whether or not that weapons on the plane would have been effective on Godzilla in the first place.
Highly doubt it.
Yeah, but um, so they both get shipped back into mainland Japan. But of course, before they disembark, Hachibana gives Shikishima the photos of the dead mechanics that were on that island, which, of course, doesn't help Shikishima's. Like we follow like Shikishima's mental state throughout this entire film, just pretty much dealing with PTSD throughout the entire film.
Yeah, that and also just the I guess the guilt of having sort of like shirked his duties as a kamikaze pilot. Because of course he like when he first returns back to his home, I think it's his sister that ends up kind of finding out, or well, kind of shaming him for coming back alive, because he was supposed to just die for his country. So that's kind of like his main struggle throughout the entire movie is just uh, him just this immense guilt he feels for having not really accomplished his duty, and feeling that he's, I guess, in a way just dishonorable for having not carried it out.
Yeah, and of course he comes back home, just pretty much seeing the result of the destruction that of of the American bombings caused in the mainland Japan, and of course
Yeah.
his neighbor, like you said, so his neighbor, like who's of course one of the survivors of the bombings, shames Shikishima for not fulfilling his duties as a kamikaze pilot. Of course, revealing the fact that she and the rest of her family were killed in the attack as well.
Yeah, and then of course Shikishima ends up stumbling upon this girl who's, uh, well, at first she just leaves him with this crying baby, um, and Shikishima of course doesn't know what to do with the baby, so he tries to go to find her again, and eventually ends up finding her and discovers that the baby was given to the girl for from like this from her dying mother, to and it was kind of entrusted to her to take care of the baby. But then, of course, she just kind of tries to hand off the baby to Shikishima and run away. But Shikishima ends up finding her, and they end up going back to his house, where pretty much throughout the majority of the movie, it kind of we see. I think over the course of like a few years or so, or 2 or 3 years, I think like they live together with the baby, as the baby grows up into like a small child, and it's kind of this I would say sort of a weird relationship, because like it kind of well, it doesn't really get romantic, but you get the feeling that that's kind of what it is. But we kind of learn later like why Shikishima doesn't want to really like commit into any kind of intimate relationship with her, uh, which mainly has to do with his own personal struggles of having not accomplished his duty,
Yeah.
and that he's in a way like still fighting his own personal war.
Yeah, so so both Shikishima and the woman named Noriko end up living together alongside with their adopted child Akiko. So over the next couple of years, Shikishima, of course, finds a job working as a minesweeper to pretty much get money for getting rid of mines that were placed over the course of the war. So he meets up with I think I think three other guys
Yeah,
on like on a wooden fishing boat, helping well, not really disarming mines, just basically like
Just blowing them up.
yeah, just blowing them up by cutting the chains off the uh, bottom of the ocean and then just shooting them with like a mounted gun. Um, so later that year, of course, we find out that uh, Godzilla ends up mutating and enlarging thanks to the U.S.'s nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll, and it's revealed that like Godzilla ends up destroying several like U.S. warships before heading over to Japan.
So I just like personally like how do you feel about uh just the appearance of Godzilla in this movie and the way that he was handled in general? Because like I kind of compare this to the last Japanese Godzilla movie that came out, which was Shin Godzilla, and the way they approached Godzilla in that movie. This one like I said before, like because the movie is a very heavily obviously inspired by the original Godzilla. It's a lot more like how he was in the original movie, where he was just this force of destruction, and his design is very much similar to the original Godzilla, and not so much the weird, unsettling looking Godzilla that we got in Shin Godzilla. Uh, Also, it is somewhat similar to Shin Godzilla in a way where like he does sort of mutate through the nuclear radiation, but whereas in Shin Godzilla, however, he more like evolves into different forms, which I thought was pretty interesting. But here it's more so that the nuclear radiation just seemingly makes him more powerful and makes him just very angry.
I really like this version of Godzilla because it
Yeah,
gives him for one thing like he moves a lot more freely than he does than the Shin Godzilla, and I also like the designs of his the way his dorsal fins looked in comparison to other previous designs of Godzilla as well. It looked more
I
like the designs of those what was it, those dorsal fins look more like if you were looking at barbed wire of sorts instead of like the usual like um no normally they would like look like a maple leaf design of sorts, but these designs like will look more like if you were staring at a barbed wire design.
I also feel like they made him look more menacing, where like he kind of wears this just kind of like it seemingly like angry expression on his face most of the time, as opposed to where in Shin Godzilla he kind of had this like wide eyed sort of look, and it sort of looked like that throughout the entire movie. Where here he just looks like he just looks angry, like he just looks pissed off.
Yeah,
Um, I
it's mainly just to portray him as a more rampaging beast of sorts.
Yeah. I also felt like the CG was done a lot better in this one as in compared to Shin, with the way Godzilla looked and the way he moves.
Yeah, in comparison to yeah, like I said, Shin Godzilla, like he mostly just stays almost in a stationary position, even when he walks. He doesn't really move his body much at all, with the exception of his tail. However, like I said, in this version of Godzilla, he has more free movements this time around. I don't know if like I'm I'm pretty sure it could be motion capture of sorts. It's possible it might be. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it definitely makes him feel more alive than Shin Godzilla was back in 2016.
Yeah. I also feel like the first time that the main character encounters Shin or not Shin Godzilla, but yeah, Godzilla in this movie is uh is really intense just because of the what happens in the scene. Um and basically they they know that Godzilla is coming. They heard that he's like I think they hear that about Godzilla's destruction or something, or that he's been like spotted in the ocean or something like that. And they stumble upon him, and the way the scene plays out is just really intense. Where you just see Godzilla's head mostly, like following close behind them on this rickety boat, and they're trying to stop him by um, like kind of like shooting these mines and shooting them as they go into his mouth. Um, and it's just a really intense scene, just because like he's just right on them the whole time.
Yeah, and like they launched like two mines at him. Like the first one
Yeah.
barely grazes him on his dorsal fins, but the second one, like you said, it catches him in its mouth before Shikishima ends up using the mounted gun to shoot the mine on his head. Um, it looked like it stopped him at first. Unfortunately, he ends up regenerating at such a monstrous rate. Like he's missing half his head, but he still manages to survive it.
Yeah, and that's like another like big plot point in the movie is that Godzilla's like just really fast regeneration. That's how they learned that he can that he just can just regenerate really fast. So like it seems like there's not much you can really do against him. He'll just end up regenerating.
Yeah, and but of course they still end up buying enough time before one of the last remaining Japanese cruisers ends up shooting at Godzilla. But unfortunately, they it ends up getting destroyed by Godzilla's what was it, atomic breath.
Yeah. Um I mean, also like, how do you feel about the approach to his atomic breath in this movie? It reminded me a little bit of the MonsterVerse Godzilla atomic breath, but it maybe not as like over the top, I guess.
It looks
I mean, I like the way it was done.
like it looks like you know it's coming because
Yeah,
like unlike the MonsterVerse Godzilla where you do see like the glow on his tail up to his dorsal fins, but this one like his dorsal fins just like literally just pop off like not pop off
yeah,
like pop out like or protrude out longer each time like the glow gets closer to where he's about to unleash it.
yeah. He kind of does like this charge up, and he kind of just fires it almost like a ray beam, essentially.
Yeah, and of course, it unleashes like this huge nuclear blast. But of course, this leads into the next scene in which Godzilla ends up making landfall, where he ends up attacking the city of Ginza, where Shikishima's girlfriend Noriko works. Um, Nor
Yeah,
Noriko like she gets in the middle of like a Godzilla's attack, and she's on like this moving train where Godzilla like literally just grabs it, and Noriko just somehow survives this entire situation. Like she's the only survivor of that train. When she's like when
yeah.
Godzilla's grabbing that train from up from the ground.
Yeah, because of course she falls straight into the water below and it ends up surviving that. Um, but honestly, I feel like that out of all the scenes in the movie, like this is probably the best scene in the whole movie. I feel like that's why they used it in the trailer. But it's definitely the best scene just because of like how impressive the destruction is, like how much Godzilla ends up just destroying, and it's the most impressive looking scene because this is where we get to see Godzilla up close and rampaging on land. Um, and it was, and of course, just we see all the people get caught in the middle of it, and all the collateral damage that Godzilla causes.
I mean, you literally see Godzilla trampling these people,
Yeah,
just in such
yeah, like they're trying to run away from just him just like stepping on the ground where it just causes a massive just it shatters the ground beneath them.
yeah, and of course, Shikushima ends up making it back in time to help Noriko, uh, but unfortunately, Godzilla unleashes his atomic breath into the city, where of course it unleashes like almost a nuclear blast, and Noriko ends up pushing Shikishima into an empty alleyway before she gets caught in the blast herself.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's essentially almost like a tornado. It just blows everything away that gets that's within the vicinity of where he unleashes his atomic breath. So her and all these other people just end up going flying along with all these buildings, uh, get destroyed around them.
Yeah, I mean, I still need to give props to to the actor who plays Shikishima. I think his name is Ryunosuke uh, Kamiki. He does a really
Yeah,
good job at portraying just his overall anguish and pain throughout this entire film.
yeah. I thought all the actors did a really good job. I mean, the acting in this was just really great. And I mean, especially like we said, like it's interesting because it has some of the best, honestly, some of the best characters I've seen in a like a kaiju movie.
Yeah, and it, I mean, he really displays like his PTSD and survivor skill really well. And of course, this whole catastrophe really nearly pushes them over the edge. Thinking that his that Noriko is dead. Um, he's of course devastated by the loss. Supposedly, devastated by the loss of Noriko, and this of course Shikishima goes over the edge and vows revenge against Godzilla. And this is of course where the citizens of Japan end up taking it upon himself to fight against Godzilla without the help of the government.
It is kind of funny how that's the case in this movie, whereas like in Shin Godzilla, it's actually the government trying to deal with the threat of Godzilla, whereas in this movie, the government just refuses to help or do anything against Godzilla, and it's just up to the people to act to stop him.
Yeah, they say the reason why their own government refuses to do so is because they're waning military thanks to World War II, and they can't rely on the help of the U.S. government because of tensions with the then Soviet Union, Russia at the time, which of course was during the Cold War.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense considering the time period.
So Shikishima and his friends of the Minesweeper crew uh, help set up a meeting of what their plan is to take down Godzilla. Their plan is to use like these what was it, these tanks to lower the water's buoyancy to drag Godzilla down so far deep and uh, so far deep down the depths of the ocean. I think somewhere like around 1,500 meters. You,
Yeah, they're hoping that the water pressure ends up killing him.
yeah, but they also mentioned should that plan fail, that they'll like inflate balloons from underwater to have Godzilla forced back up to use like basically just like to use that pressure to, I guess, to decompress his body of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the more interesting and unique ways to try to fight Godzilla that I've seen in a Godzilla movie. Um, I mean, like in Shin Godzilla, like they end up like what like freezing him or something. So I mean that was kind of interesting too. But this one, I've never really I've never really seen them try to do something like this with Godzilla.
Yeah. So Shikishima, of course, determined to follow through with this plan. His friends take him over to I think one of the prototype Kyushu Shinden fighters. Of course, it's not working at the moment. So Shikishima plans to bring back one of the mechanics that he met earlier on in the film. Of course, Tachibana. Of course, Tachibana doesn't want to be found after, understandably, after what happened after the events of Odo Island. So Shikishima like tries several ways by looking up records of where he might be, and possibly sending him letters of sending him letters of apology over what happened during the events of the island. So eventually, Tachibana ends up uh, meeting up with Shikishima. Of course, like he's still not happy over what happened at the island, so he ends up beating him up several times before reluctantly agreeing to repair the fighter plane.
Yeah, I mean I think he doesn't he end up agreeing because Shikishima says that he's basically planning to kind of like kill himself by flying into Godzilla's mouth with the bombs.
And not only that, it's just because like he's actually fighting for something. Basically, like
Yeah.
of course he's with Noriko gone, like he's the only one left to potentially care for his adopted daughter Akiko.
Yeah, and then we see eventually, like near the end of the movie, he leaves a letter behind to, I guess, like ask his neighbor to take care of her, or or something like that. I mean, we don't really know like the full context, I think, of what he said yet, um, and because we don't really know that if whether or not he's really planning to die.
Yeah. So eventually, the plant eventually uh, starts by with well, of course, Godzilla ends up resurfacing and starts rampaging somewhere in the rural mainland of Japan. So the plane, of course, once it gets ready, Shikishima draws it out back into the ocean where I think what was it? the two destroyers with those with those buoyancy devices and end up encircling Godzilla and then end up sinking him down like 1,500 meters uh, down below. Unfortunately,
Mm.
Godzilla somehow still manages to survive um, before they and the guys at the in the boats end up activating the balloons, which drag Godzilla back almost near up to the surface before Godzilla stops it midway. Um, Thankfully, like a fleet of tugboats end up lending their assistance to get Godzilla back to the surface.
Yeah, I guess they didn't anticipate that Godzilla would try to like chew through the inflation devices.
Yeah, and of course, with Godzilla even more enraged than usual, he prepares to destroy the ships using his atomic breath again. But before he can unleash it, Shigeshima flies his plane into Godzilla's mouth with a bomb attached inside the plane and ends up blowing him up.
Yeah, and of course it's then revealed that he that he ejects at the last, pretty much at the last second, and that there was an ejection. Uh, there was like an ejection seat that was built into the plane. Um, that the mechanic built it into the plane because he wanted Shishima uh, to live for his adopted daughter. Um, so of course Shikishima ends up surviving. Uh, the uh, the bombs blow up in Godzilla's mouth, and seemingly that ends up taking him down.
Yeah. So, and of course, with the combination with the Tachibana's plane exploding and Godzilla charting his atomic beam at the same time, causes his entire body to just completely tear apart.
Yeah, I haven't really seen Godzilla get defeated like that before, where his body just like disintegrates like that.
Yeah.
That was kind of interesting.
Yeah. So eventually, the entire crew celebrates as Shikishima parachutes down, and once they port back home, Shikishima receives a telegram uh, and heads to the hospital with Akiko, which he eventually gets reunited with Noriko, who somehow survived that destruction in Ginza.
Yeah, I, I honestly, it seems really weird that she ended up surviving. Um, I mean, she and all these other people, we see her get blown away by that atomic breath, and we can only assume that she more than likely went flying, and her body must have, when it hit the ground. I don't really think many people would survive that. Um, and not to mention I think the atomic rain that happened after Godzilla destroyed Ginza ended up like kind of hitting everybody that was in the within the area, um, and her included, of course. Which we see at the very end, where we see that she's alive, but we also see this weird kind of growth on her back. It's kind of debatable as to what that is. I mean, I would assume possibly it's some kind of radiation poisoning, uh, either that or it means something else. I don't know, but I mean, yeah, it's kind of funny because yeah, she survives, but she's, I mean, if that's the case, if she is irradiated, then she's not going to live very long anyway. Um, Possibly the same thing could be true of Shikishima, that he could have gotten irradiated too. Um, so yeah, it's a little bit, it's kind of in a way, I guess, a little bit of a bittersweet ending in a way. And also we see like this one last scene where we see Godzilla's flesh regenerating in the ocean. So it kind of hints that of course Godzilla will eventually come back. It is, again, I hate to keep making comparisons to Shin Godzilla, but I feel like there's a few parallels with it, because Shin Godzilla ends on a kind of a similar note, where you think Godzilla's defeated, and he's pretty much been stopped for good. But then when you see his body, like his frozen body, you also see these creatures growing out of his tail, which look humanoid in form. So which implies that something could still happen. Godzilla could come back in some way, or he could go through some other evolution or something like that. And I feel like the same is true for how this movie ends.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Like several people have been thinking whether or not this will get a sequel. director Yamazaki implied that it's possible that there could be a sequel for this film that'll explore like the damage of what Godzilla left behind. Although he doesn't really confirm whether or not he'll bring back some of the original characters. It's possible he could bring this next film could take place many decades after the events of this film, but it's not known at this point. But
Hmm.
it's popular so far. Like the movie's popularity is good enough for them to warrant a potential sequel.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of do hope it does eventually get a sequel. I'm just kind of wondering how a sequel would play out. Um, I think it taking place years and years later would kind of be a good idea. I don't think it should take place like right after the events of the first movie. Um, but yeah, I thought this was a really good Godzilla movie. It's I think it's one of the best we've gotten in a long time. It's hard to say if I like this better than Shin Godzilla though. I feel like both have their good points and their bad points. Like for instance, this movie has I feel like it has better CG than Shin Godzilla did. But I liked the concept of Shin Godzilla a little bit better than this one. This one is a little bit closer to the original Godzilla, which is of course what the director set out to do. Um, but I mean I also feel like this movie has I would say like arguably better destruction scenes where Godzilla's like rampaging through the city than I guess than Shin Godzilla does. I guess that's debatable because you know there are some pretty good scenes with Shin Godzilla where he's just destroying everything around him. Um, I feel like this also has better characters than Shin Godzilla. Whereas with Shin Godzilla, it was mostly just it. It did have a main character, but they didn't really have a lot really going for them, and it was mostly just the entirety of the Japanese government trying to fight against Shin Godzilla. Whereas this one is more of a personal story. Um, so I feel like I don't know, it's hard to say, but I do think this is a really good Godzilla movie regardless. Um, like I said, I feel like it's one of the best that's come out in a long time. Um, I definitely like it a lot better than some of the recent MonsterVerse movies, but I feel like the MonsterVerse is kind of trying to go down the route of a lot of the other Godzilla movies that we got in the past, where Godzilla's just fighting other monsters and it's not really meant to be taken all that seriously. Where this movie kind of harkens back to the original movie, where it's sort of like very dark and serious, and Godzilla is more of a metaphor, like an allegory for the atomic bomb, or just him being a force of nature.
Yeah.
Um,
It
yeah,
well, from my honest opinion with the MonsterVerse, it's just lately like they're trying to set it up similarly to like how like the MCU is like with the Marvel Cinematic Universe of sorts. Because now
yeah.
like now they're adding Kong, they're adding new monsters here and there, and
Well, I also feel like the Hollow Earth is sort of an excuse for them to introduce all these other kaiju, to kind of say that they've all just been like I guess existing in the Hollow Earth for years.
yeah, it. I just don't feel like a lot of emphasis is more into Godzilla anymore. It's just about it's the bigger expanding universe of of the whole kaiju universe. Uh, like
Yeah.
they kind of did portray Godzilla as this imposing force, in the first film, but then it started I don't say it diverted away. It kind of like I said, it expanded even further when they released, of course, Kong Skull Island, and then they moved it on to like Con- King of the Monsters by bringing back Ghidorah, Mothra, and Rodan, and then of course we had Godzilla versus Kong following that, and
Mm.
then of course we're getting that upcoming Godzilla Kong, the new Empire, which is going to introduce this new like gorilla like kaiju similar to Kong, which it's I mean right now I think they're leaning more heavily into like the action aspect of the series than it is with the whole with the aspect that we see like in Shin Godzilla and Minus One.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, like I said, I thought this movie was great, and I mean, I like that it's getting so much praise, and it actually is making a lot of money at the box office. That, hopefully that will warrant a potential sequel in the future. But, Other than that, though, I don't really have too much else to say about the movie. I don't know if you have anything else to say about it.
If I were to give this movie a score, I definitely give this movie a 9 out of 10. It definitely has.
Yeah.
I also personally think it's like a somewhat better movie than Shin Godzilla, um, due to the fact that it has a lot better character development. Um, particularly with Shikishima's overall character arc of dealing with post traumatic stress disorder and his survivor's guilt in dealing with Godzilla.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely felt like the characters got much more of a spotlight in the movie. Um, whereas, like, as opposed to Shin Godzilla, where it felt like Godzilla was, he was the main focus. Like, he still is, of course, in this movie, but it is very much, there are definitely more scenes with the human characters and them dealing with their own personal drama, compared to, like, Shin Godzilla. Um, but yeah, I would agree with the score though. I'd probably also give it a 9 out of 10. I definitely thought it was like it like for me it's hard to say if I like it better or not. I like I mentioned, I feel like Shin Godzilla has things that I personally think it did better than this, but this movie also has things that it did better than Shin Godzilla. Um, but yeah, guys. That all being said, until next time, we will see you all later.